communication, we also want to look at problem team dynamics or problems with communication and what might happen when you're working with teams to get a marketing effort or a marketing plan completed. So there are always going to be people that are avoiding issues or resisting the process or playing dumb, or there might be indirect communication, passive aggressive, so to speak, even though that's not really in the DSM, as many of you psychology students may know. People that just don't participate, or people that try to control through cynicism. We've all seen these types of people in groups. So let's take a look at how to deal with problems when they exist. Some of the root causes of resistance in a team have to do with these three things, right? If you feel forced into doing something, like you didn't have a choice, if you're being volunteered into something, like someone just decided that you'd be able to do it when you weren't asked, or also there's a fear of expressing oneself that sometimes happen and people find resistance there, where they're afraid of doing a bad job or just in saying what they think, right? So these are the typical root causes of resistance in a team. The best initial approach to resistance is to basically, if you are a leader in that team, trying to get a marketing effort out or a marketing plan together, is to acknowledge people's concerns, right? Make sure they know you hear them. This is really important just in terms of making sure that they know that you're listening and that you acknowledge their concern. You don't want to focus on that reluctant team member, because oftentimes we can spend, like, if you have an hour meeting and you spend 20 minutes even with a reluctant team member trying to make things work, you're wasting everyone else's time. So sometimes it's really important to make sure their concerns don't take up the entire meeting. And what you can do is always just be like, hey, let's talk about that after the meeting. I want to meet up with you one-on-one to address your concerns. It's important to do check-ins for feedback and to negotiate things, right? So if you have built-in feedback mechanisms in your project planning and have retrospectives, which is basically when a project is done, you get everybody together to talk about what went well and what didn't go well. Over time, you're going to have people much less resistant, basically, in your team. The longer-term approach to team resistance would take a look at a climate of safety and openness in your team, being able to take risks and experiment. And if someone has an idea that they want to test out, maybe even if you don't think it would work, maybe you try it anyway for a little bit and then get everyone's opinion and everyone's vote as to whether it would work. So and here you see I say, let's try that for a sprint or two. A sprint is with Agile, it's with project management with most tech companies. I used to use it in marketing, and what that meant was that let's try it for 2 weeks and then we'll assess as to whether it worked or not. And it's also important to just not pull rank. Sorry for the Siri again. I guess I got to turn off Siri when I do videos. But it's important to share feelings and take risks as well. So you don't want to pull rank or attack the person who's making a suggestion. Just try to be really open, and that's better in the long run. With disruptive individuals, it's good to, you might be able to ignore it first without denying what they're saying, right? So if they keep on coming up at you, you might be able to just shift the focus and it could work, but then follow up with them later. And it's important to point out and remember that conflict can actually strengthen and enhance teams, but it can also destroy them if they're unresolved. So conflict, when dealt with effectively, can actually make everybody work better. But if it's not addressed, it's not a good thing. So during specific meetings, when you have disruptive behavior from individuals on your team, it's good to take a look at making sure everyone has a chance to speak. So if someone's monopolizing the meeting with talking, you can say, hey, I want to make sure to listen to Jane over here and Juan over there as well. So hold on a second and let's get back to you, right? It's important to use I statements, just like if you were working with an individual, right? Like, I feel this way. And that helps keep it from being personal. It's good to check in for accuracy as a leader. So if you're talking about how a project gets done or how you measure your metrics or whatnot, you can check in. Hey, does everybody agree with what I just said? Does that make sense? Do we need to go over anything, right? It's part of reflective listening as well. So I hear you saying blah, 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 or that you feel this way, or that you think it should go that way. What do you think about that? These are all super important ways in which you can address disruptive behavior. The common ground exercise at the bottom there is a really good way also if you have a lot of disruption or a lot of people that feel differently, where they can break up into groups and figure out what they can agree on, and that can be a place from which you can agree on as to how to go forward. In my experience in teams, this does not happen very often where you have that kind of disruption or that kind of dissent, but it can happen, and it's good to be kind of thoughtful about it. Here's some structural tools as well, because part of communication is in the structure in which it's communicated. So you can take a look at a schedule that's already agreed upon, right? The project could have a charter where everyone signed off on it before they even started, right? And they've gotten their input already. And you can always say, hey, you know, that's not in our project charter. We're going to have to deal with that next time, or let's look at that in the retrospective, right? When we're done and we're checking in. There's also a lessons learned database that you could create, or knowledge base, where you can pull from past experiences and say, hey, when we tried it that way, this is what happened. How do we keep that from happening again, right? And then you could always refer to your sponsor, the executive, to say, well, you know what, I disagree, but let's go to our executive VP and they can make the final decision, right? If that has to happen in the end. Right, so it's important to always remember your stakeholders. They have ownership and they end up making the decision. They have a lot of knowledge and have a lot to contribute. They may not be in your daily meetings, but it's important to keep them informed. When talking to your stakeholder about a project, these are some prompts that can be really helpful in terms of completing a project. Like, when do you want to hear from me? How often? How would you like to hear from me? Just email, or would you like to meet every couple weeks? What issues do you think might happen that I need to think about? And also just the cultural awareness of what's going on in the company. These are all things to think about. And then finally, we want to take a look at key triggers for when you would want to communicate to your stakeholders and more, right? So when you start a project, it could be good to communicate how it went, or what happened, or what came of it. Any kind of organizational changes to your team, like you promoted someone, or this person's taking on this part of the project, and also schedule changes. And then also what happened with the retrospective. These are all obvious places to communicate. Okay, and I'm going to do the next section on metrics.